Evermere Hall woke slowly that morning, as though even the house itself sensed the heaviness in the air. The winter sky lay over the estate like a sheet of pewter, dimming the colors of the rugs and muting the shine on the polished oak floors. The hearth in the morning room crackled low, its flames curling inward rather than reaching outward, mirroring the quiet ache that seemed to pulse through the halls. Elyndra Veilheart moved through the room with a gentleness that did not match the tightness in her chest. Her hand glided along the back of a chair, not to steady herself, but out of habit. This was her domain, her sanctuary, the life she had built thread by thread beside her husband over 10 years of marriage. And yet this morning, even familiar things felt fragile. Torian Evermere stood near the tall gilt mirror by the doorway, adjusting the crisp fold of his cravat. He did so without hurry, as if he had all the time in the world, though the carriage outside had already been warmed and the horses readied for his departure to Italy. His trunk stood packed by the door. His gloves rested on the table. His coat waited in neat, controlled precision. Torian had always been a man of order. But there was one thing about him that had never been orderly: the way he loved his wife. He sensed her presence before she spoke. He always did. He turned toward her, and the faint morning light caught the edge of his jaw, the soft green of his eyes, the quiet devotion written in the smallest shift of his expression. "Come here," he murmured. Elyndra obeyed, though her steps were slower than usual. She tried to hide it, that small tremor inside her ribs, but Torian's gaze swept over her with that unsettling ability to notice everything. He brushed a strand of hair back behind her ear and pressed a gentle kiss to her brow. It was a simple gesture, yet one he gave as though it still meant everything. 10 years. 5 children. Countless sleepless nights and endless mornings. And still he kissed her with the reverence of a man who remembered the first time. In truth, Torian Evermere made love to his wife in much the same way. Slowly, tenderly, with an intensity that made her fall in love all over again. Not youthful passion, but married devotion. Seasoned, deep, unshakable. It was why mornings like this tore at her so quietly. His hand came to rest at her waist, thumb grazing the fabric of her gown. "It will be colder today," she said softly, smoothing the front of his coat in an effort to keep her hands busy. "Your carriage will freeze before you do." He smiled. God, that soft smile, the one he gave only to her. "Then I shall carry your warmth with me," he said. Her breath faltered. There were men in London who declared their passion loudly, dramatically, flamboyantly. Torian was not one of them. His affection was a quiet fire, a steady warmth, a constant presence. And that, somehow, was what made it unbearable when he left. He tilted her chin upward, their foreheads nearly touching. "Elyndra," he whispered, and that single word seemed to soften the very walls around them. She looked up at him, trying to memorize every detail, his scent, the faint stubble along his jaw, the way his gaze warmed when it settled on her. His voice dropped to that familiar, intimate softness that existed only for her. "So tell me, what should you do if your heart aches?" Ah, their ritual. The one thread shared between them every time he left for Italy. She swallowed, her lips parting in a breath that trembled before she steadied it. "I shall wait for your return," she whispered back, "for only your presence stills the breaks." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. He brushed his thumb along her cheekbone. "Good girl," he murmured, the words a tender caress rather than praise. Before Elyndra could steady herself again, small footsteps padded into the hall. Ansel Evermere, their eldest at 8 years old, rubbed sleep from his eyes as he approached. His dark hair stuck up in every direction, and he clutched a wooden toy soldier in one hand. "Papa," he said, blinking up at his father. "Must you go again?" Torian knelt without hesitation, lifting Ansel into his arms. "I must, little bird, but I will bring you something from Milano, as promised." "A sword?" Ansel asked hopefully. Torian chuckled. "A small one. Your mother would chase me across the county if I brought home anything larger." Elyndra smiled despite herself, though the ache beneath her ribs barely loosened. One by one, the children trickled in, Mira with her thumb in her mouth, the twins tumbling in sleepy disarray, baby Edric barely awake in Mrs. Halomere's arms. Their little flock gathered around Torian, clinging to him with the unquestioned devotion children had for a father who adored them. And he did adore them. Sometimes Elyndra believed that was why he held her at night with such quiet desperation, because loving his family made him vulnerable in a way nothing else in his life ever had. He kissed each child, whispered promises of presents and stories upon return, and handed Edric back to Mrs. Halomere. Then he turned back to Elyndra, and the room seemed to narrow until nothing else existed. "You will write to me?" he asked. "I always do," she whispered. "And I to you." Their fingers brushed, a soft graze that sent heat up her arm. His palm cupped her jaw, thumb moving in slow circles. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her fully, but instead, he pressed one more soft kiss to her temple, lingering there. "I hate leaving you," he murmured into her hair. Her chest tightened. "Then stay." For a brief second, he stilled. A single, fragile second where the possibility hung between them, but duty tugged at him as it always did. He exhaled, stepping back with visible reluctance. 2 weeks, he promised. No more. He reached for his gloves. The carriage wheels shifted outside. A footman knocked once, announcing readiness. Torian took her hand and brought it to his lips. "My heart," he whispered against her skin. And then he was gone. The door closed behind him, sealing the warmth in and carrying him out into the bitter morning cold. Elyndra stood perfectly still. She always did, until the sound of the carriage began to fade. Only then did her breath leave her in a quiet, trembling exhale. Only then did her fingers curl against her gown, holding the last place he touched. Only then did she feel the faintest flicker of dread she could not explain. 2 weeks, she told herself. 2 weeks, and he would return. 2 weeks, and the house would breathe again. 2 weeks, and everything would be right, as it had always been. She believed it. She had no reason not to. And yet, as she turned toward Thorian's study to tidy his things, a thin thread of unease followed her. Small, barely noticeable, but persistent. Evermere Hall had always held Thorian's presence. But that morning, it felt as if something else, something cold and fragile, had entered with the winter wind. Something waiting. Something she did not yet understand. Not until she opened the study door. Not until she reached for his ledgers. Not until she saw the letter sealed in unfamiliar handwriting. Not until her world began, quietly, to break. The study door closed softly behind Elyndra as she stepped inside, the faint scent of Thorian's cologne still hanging in the air. It always lingered here longer than any other room, warm cedarwood and faint bergamot, a scent that had settled into the very grain of the desk and the spines of the books lining the shelves. She moved with care, mindful not to disturb the papers Torian had left in meticulous order. He was a man of discipline. Ledgers aligned perfectly, inkstands polished, quills trimmed neatly. Even after 10 years, he treated this room the way he treated their marriage, with devotion, with respect, with an attention to detail that made her heart swell. She reached for the ledger he'd left open the night before, intending to place it aside so Mrs. Halomere could dust the surface. But as she lifted it, a thin rectangle slipped out from between the pages, landing silently upon the desk. A letter, sealed in deep crimson wax, addressed to Torian Evermere, in handwriting that did not belong anywhere in this house. Elyndra froze. Her fingers hovered over the letter without touching it. She told herself she had no business reading something meant for her husband. She told herself she trusted him. She told herself she was a wife of dignity, a woman of sense. But something she could not name, crept up her spine. A whisper of winter. A chill beneath the ribs. Her hand drifted down. Her fingertips brushed the paper. She should walk away. She should leave it for his return. She should pretend she had never seen it. But the seal was broken. Already opened. Already read. By him. Elyndra's heart began to thrum, an uneven, dizzying rhythm. She lifted the letter with careful hands, unfolding it slowly, as if each crease carried a weight that might snap her bones. The words were inked in a flowing Italian script. Her Italian was fluent. Torian had always loved that she could write in it. They'd exchanged flirtatious notes in the language during their courtship, but there was nothing flirtatious in the words she now read. At first, she tried to take them in calmly, sensibly, like a sensible wife, but the meaning struck her like an open palm. My dearest Torian, I have waited long enough. If you do not return to Italy and keep your promise, I shall have no choice but to come to London myself. Elyndra's pulse faltered. Her fingers trembled harder. She forced herself to keep reading. You know the boy needs his father. You know it is your duty to us both. If you refuse to marry me, I will tell your wife everything, everything. Her knees went weak. She clutched the back of Torian's chair, her breath breaking in tiny, fractured gasps. No, it was impossible. Torian loved her. He had always loved her. He loved her with quiet intensity, with devotion, with tenderness that could not be faked. Her vision blurred. She blinked, but the words did not change. I will not be kept in the shadows any longer. Your visits must not be only for obligation. I love you, and the boy deserves your name. Elyndra pressed her fist to her mouth. A sound escaped her, a thin, strangled whimper she barely recognized as her own. Her heart didn't just ache. It cracked. It splintered. It tore silently beneath her ribs like delicate lace being ripped seam by seam. She stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the desk. The letter slipped from her fingers, floating to the floor like a dead leaf. Her breath came in sharp, jagged pulls. No, she told herself. It couldn't be true. Torian was not that man, not a man who could betray her. Not a man who could father a child with another woman. Not a man who would let another woman say I love you without repulsion. But the letter existed. It existed. And the ink was fresh. Her mind began to fracture, 1,000 whispers of doubt rushing into her skull all at once. He's been traveling to Italy for years. He always said it was business. He always smelled faintly of wine when he returned. He always held her just a little too tightly those nights. Her hand came to her stomach, as if to hold herself together. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching, not until the study door burst open. Elyndra! Verena Caldwell stood in the doorway, cheeks flushed from hurrying, cloak still on her shoulders. Mrs. Hallowmere said you hadn't come down to breakfast. Are you unwell? Elyndra lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were already drowning. Verena's breath left her body. Dear God, what happened? Elyndra couldn't answer. She tried, opened her mouth, but no sound came. Verena rushed forward, catching her by the elbows just as Elyndra's legs began to give. Sit, Verena whispered fiercely, guiding her into Torian's chair. Tell me what it is. Elyndra, speak to me. Elyndra's gaze drifted to the floor where the letter lay open, its ink shimmering cruelly in the light. Verena followed her line of sight. She bent down. She lifted the letter. She read it. Her eyes widened. Her jaw clenched. Her breath hissed sharply between her teeth. Then her entire body went rigid. That vile, wretched devil, Verena spat, hands shaking with fury. He did this, Torian, after 10 years, after 5 children. Elyndra, look at me. Elyndra shook her head weakly, tears spilling over. He loves me. Oh, sweetheart. Verena knelt in front of her and cupped her face with trembling hands. Loving someone doesn't mean they can't break you. I will burn the world down before I let this destroy you. Do you understand me? A sob broke from Elyndra's throat. She pressed both hands to her mouth, trying to contain the sound, trying to remember how to breathe. Verena pulled her into her arms as Elyndra's body finally collapsed. her shoulders shaking, her breath splintering, her tears wetting the front of Verina's dress. "It's all right," Verina murmured, stroking her hair. "Let it out. Let all of it out. No one will judge you here." Elyndra clung to her friend as though to a lifeline in a storm, shaking so violently she felt as though something inside her might shatter beyond repair. And in the doorway, unnoticed, Isolde Fenwick appeared, face paling, hands flying to her mouth as she saw the devastation on Elyndra's face. Silently, she stepped forward. Silently, she knelt beside her friends. Silently, she laid a comforting hand atop Elyndra's trembling one. And Evermere Hall, once warm, once whole, filled with the sound of a heart breaking behind its closed doors. Not loudly, not angrily, but with the soft, ruinous grief that could only exist in a woman who had loved her husband with her whole soul. The storm inside Elyndra did not pass quickly. Grief never did. It came in slow waves, first disbelief, then shock, then an ache so deep it felt carved into bone. Every breath trembled, every blink stung, every thought seemed to strike her heart anew. Verina and Isolde remained at her side, refusing to leave her even as the morning stretched toward afternoon. The three women had once spent afternoons in this very study, laughing, planning picnics, sewing children's dresses, and whispering about the small joys and frustrations of domestic life. But the air now felt thick, weighed down with the kind of silence that grew only from pain, too vast for word. Elyndra sat curled in Torian's chair, a wool blanket draped over her shoulders, though the room was not cold. Verina had wrapped it around her herself, muttering about drafts and nonsense just to hide the crack in her own voice. Isolde perched on the edge of the chaise nearby, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as if holding them loosely might allow her own sorrow to spill out. Neither woman spoke for a long while. The only sound was Elyndra's quiet, shaky breathing and the occasional flutter of the letter's edges when a draught slipped beneath the door. Finally, Isolde rose and moved with soft footsteps to stand behind Elyndra. She placed her hands gently on Elyndra's shoulders, fingers warm and steady. "Drink something," she murmured, her voice barely more than a breath. "You'll faint otherwise." Elyndra barely shook her head. "I cannot." "You can," Isolde insisted gently. "Even grief cannot swallow every part of you." Verina scoffed without humor. "It certainly tries." Isolde shot her a sharp look. "Verina." "What?" Verina snapped. "Should I lie? Should I pretend this isn't ruinous? A child, Isolde, a child with another woman. 10 years of loyalty repaid with this." Her hand slashed through the air. No, I refuse to be calm about it." Elyndra flinched. At once, Verina dropped her voice. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm just furious." She leaned forward, taking Elyndra's trembling hand in hers. "Dearest heart, say something, anything. Tell us what you feel." Elyndra stared at the wall as if the patterns in the paneling might offer answers. Finally, she whispered, "I cannot feel it all at once." Isolde's eyes softened. "Then you will feel it little by little. And we will sit here as long as it takes." Elyndra closed her eyes. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. Isolde's thumbs brushed them away. Minutes passed in stillness. Then an hour. Then something shifted. Subtle, but unmistakable. A knock at the door. "Lady Evermere." Mrs. Hallomere's voice floated in, old and gentle. "The children ask for you." Verina stiffened. "Not now." Mrs. Hallomere paused. "They grow worried, especially little Mira." Elyndra pressed her hands to her face. A small sob cracked through her fingers. Verina shot Isolde a warning glance, then stood and opened the door only a sliver. "Tell them their mother is resting." "They asked if Papa left because they did something wrong," Mrs. Hallomere whispered. Elyndra's head snapped up. Her breath shattered again. "Oh God, her children." "Bring them in," Isolde murmured, but Elyndra shook her head violently. "No," she rasped. "Not like this." She wiped her cheeks, but more tears followed instantly, relentless. I cannot let them see me broken. Verena's voice gentled. Then we shall hide the breaks until you can breathe again. Mrs. Hallowmere returned to the children with a soft lie about a headache, and the door closed once more, leaving Elyndra in the quiet echo of her own pain. Torian loves them, Elyndra whispered. He loves them. How could he? How could he betray them as well? Men do foolish things, Verena said coldly. Weak things. Even good men, Isolde added softly, though her voice wavered. Elyndra stared at the floor. Was I not enough? Verena knelt before her again, gripping Elyndra's hands with fierce protectiveness. Do not dare blame yourself. This is his failure, his weakness, his sin. Not yours. Elyndra shook her head. He always held me so tenderly. He always. A sob stabbed through her words. I trusted him with every part of me. And he will answer for what he's done, Verena said, eyes blazing. Isolde sat on the arm of the chair and rested her cheek softly against Elyndra's hair. But you need not decide your future today. Breathe, sweetheart. Just breathe. Elyndra tried. She truly tried. But every breath felt like drawing shards of glass through her lungs. Perhaps, Elyndra whispered faintly, the letter is mistaken. Verena's head jerked up. Elyndra, perhaps she lies. Elyndra pressed on, desperation fraying her voice. Perhaps the child is not his. Perhaps he never... Isolde knelt beside Verena, taking Elyndra's trembling hands. Hush, she whispered. You do not need to reason with the pain yet. But if she lies... Elyndra's voice cracked. Then why did he receive her letter? Why and why would he not tell me? Not once in 10 years. Verena closed her eyes as if swallowing her own answers. Isolde lowered her gaze. Because shame silences even the strongest men. Elyndra leaned forward, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook violently as the weight of it all pressed down upon her, the broken ritual, the letter's cruel words, the years of trust now crumbling like ash. And her friends stayed. Verena stroked her hair, fierce and trembling. Isolde rubbed her back, calm but breaking quietly beside her. No one in Evermere Hall passed by the study that day without hearing something. Muffled sobs, whispers of comfort, the fragile breath of a woman trying not to shatter entirely. By afternoon, Elyndra could no longer sit upright. Grief was exhausting in a way even childbirth had never been. Her limbs were heavy, her head pounded, her eyes felt raw. Her friends helped her to the chaise and settled pillows behind her. Verena paced the study in restless, stormy circles. Isolde brewed tea she knew Elyndra would not drink. Mrs. Hallowmere slipped in with cool cloths and gentle touches. Still, Elyndra wept. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a tremor so deep it seemed to come from the very center of her being. As evening shadows gathered along the walls, Verena finally spoke what they all feared. What will you do when he returns? Elyndra stared at the ceiling, her voice empty. I do not know. Verena approached her, gripping the edge of the chaise. If you choose to leave him, you will bring the children to my home. I swear to you, Elyndra, I will not let you face this alone. Isolde's eyes shone. And if you choose to stay, if you seek the truth from him, then I will help you stand before him with dignity. Elyndra let her eyes fall closed. Tears slid down her temples into her hairline. What if, she whispered, I can do neither? What if I cannot bear to hear him speak, but I cannot bear to lose him either? Isolde covered Elyndra's hand with her own. Verena swallowed hard. Then, Isolde murmured, we will help you bear the space between. The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, the wind brushed against the window panes like a distant warning. Inside, a woman who had once felt whole now lay shattered in her friend's arms. Broken, but not alone. And Evermere Hall, a faithful, silent witness to all things, stood guard over a grief that had only begun to unfold. The morning faded into afternoon, and afternoon into the pale stillness of early evening. By then, Elyndra's tears had slowed, but only because her body had exhausted itself beyond weeping. She lay on the chaise with her cheek pressed into the pillow, her friends flanking her like loyal sentinels. The fire crackled low, casting a dim orange glow across the room, softening the edges of her grief without soothing it. A knock sounded at the study door. Isolde rose to answer it, her movements calm despite the tightness around her eyes. Mrs. Hallowmere stood in the hall, her hands clasped anxiously. "Pardon, Miss Fenwick," the older woman whispered, "but I thought you should know. The master's carriage has reached the port. One of the stable boys saw him off." Elyndra stiffened. So he was well on his way. Gone. Unaware that his entire world had collapsed behind him. Isolde nodded gently. "Thank you, Mrs. Hallowmere. Please make certain the children remain upstairs for now." The housekeeper curtsied and slipped away. Verena exhaled a violent breath. God help him when he returns. Isolde shot her a quiet warning. "Not yet, Verena." "He deserves your fury," Verena snapped, "and when the time comes, he will face it, but for now." She knelt beside Elyndra once more, smoothing back her hair. For now, she must survive the shock. Elyndra let out a shaky cough, her voice faint. "How did you come so quickly?" Both friends exchanged a look before Isolde answered. "Mrs. Hallowmere sent a footman to fetch Verena. She feared you were taken ill. I was already on my way. I had meant to visit this morning to show you the bonnet I finished sewing for Mira." So simple. So ordinary. Women's mornings had always been filled with such quiet companionship, soft footsteps between neighboring estates, visits for tea and embroidery and gossip. It was entirely normal for them to appear at Evermere Hall without grand summons. Yet today, their presence felt like an act of divine mercy. Verena huffed. "When Mrs. Hallowmere said you hadn't appeared since dawn, I left my parlor half-dressed. I didn't even bother with the ribbons on my boots. I ran like a common field girl until I found a carriage." Elyndra's lips trembled. "I am glad you came." Verena swallowed thickly and pressed Elyndra's hand to her cheek. "Always." Silence fell again. Heavy, bleak, thick as wet wool. Then Elyndra whispered, "What will happen if I leave him?" Verena froze. Isolde inhaled sharply. The words themselves were a sin in 1887. A wife considering separation was nearly unthinkable. Verena was the first to find her voice. "If you leave him, you will stay with me. You need not fear being alone." Isolde's voice broke before she steadied it. "But you must understand the cost, Elyndra." Elyndra looked at her, eyes hollow. "The cost?" Isolde wrung her hands, her posture stiff with dread. "If you leave, society will judge you, not him. Women bear the shame of broken marriages. They always have, and your daughters, their prospects." Her breath faltered, unable to continue. Verena stepped in. "Isolde means well, but think of your safety first." "No," Elyndra whispered. "I must think of my children first." "You will not lose them," Verena vowed fiercely. But Isolde's eyes softened with painful realism. "The law is cruel. A husband may claim the children's, especially sons, especially if he cites the mother's emotional instability." Elyndra's body went still. Her hand flew to her mouth. "He would not." "No," Isolde murmured. "Torian is not that man, but the court system is." The truth sat between them like a blade. Elyndra's fear swelled until she felt she might drown in it. She had always obeyed society's rules, not out of weakness, but because she believed herself safe within them. But safety was an illusion. And she was now standing at the edge of a precipice, with no clear path forward. "I feel trapped," she whispered. "Trapped between heartbreak and fear." Verena pulled her into her arms again. "Then let us be your shield," Isolde added softly. "And your reason." Outside, the pale light faded entirely, leaving only candlelight in the study. Shadows lengthened across the walls, and the winter wind pushed at the windows as though trying to get inside. But far away, across the sea, another storm gathered. Italy. The port city of La Spezia lay beneath a sky bruised with evening clouds. Lanterns flickered along the docks, casting trembling light across the water. Torian Evermere stepped off the gangplank with his coat pulled tight against the cold sea wind. He had left Evermere Hall with a heaviness he could not explain. Italy. The port city of La Spezia lay beneath a sky bruised with evening clouds. Lanterns flickered along the docks, casting trembling light across the water. Torian Evermere stepped off the gangplank with his coat pulled tight against the cold sea wind. He had left Evermere Hall with a heaviness he could not name, a faint dread that tugged at him from the moment his carriage pulled away. Foolish, he had told himself, and yet it lingered. Elyndra's absence in that final moment had echoed through him far too sharply. He shook off the feeling and made his way toward the familiar inn. His boots struck the cobblestones in a steady rhythm. Inside, the innkeeper bowed with easy familiarity. "Signor Evermere, as always, your room is prepared." "Grazie," Torian murmured. But before he could ascend the stairs, a figure stepped from the shadows. A woman, tall, dark hair intricately pinned. Eyes like polished amber, beautiful, sharp, dangerous. Lucienne Marosa. Torian stilled. His jaw hardened. Lucienne. Her lips curved in a fragile imitation of a smile. "You received my letter?" "I did," he replied coolly, "and you should not have sent it." She approached with the soft rustle of silk, her perfume thick with jasmine and something darker beneath it. Her gaze lingered on his face, searching, assessing. "You promised you would come." "I promised nothing," he said, voice clipped. "I am here to put an end to this, once and for all." Her expression flickered, wounded for an instant, then sharpening. "You imagine you can walk away from me after everything between us?" "There is nothing between us, Lucienne." She moved swiftly, seizing the lapels of his coat with cold fingers. "You fathered my son." "I did not." "You drank that night. You do not remember. You came to me, broken, lonely, seeking comfort." His voice rose, harsh and low. "Enough." Her eyes glinted triumphantly. "If you walk away now, if you return to that delicate English wife of yours, I shall take the boy and place him at her very door." Thorian's breath left him in a sharp, stunned exhale. Elyndra's face flashed before him, her smile, her soft eyes, her warmth each morning. A cold, sick dread twisted in his chest. "You would destroy my family," he whispered. Her lips curled. "Unless you choose another future." Torian stepped closer, slowly, deliberately. For the first time, Lucienne retreated a fraction. His voice, when it came, was chilled steel. "Listen to me, Lucienne. I have endured your threats for years." Her breath hitched. "I have borne your letters, your insinuations, your false claims, every device you have employed to tether me to a night I did not choose." His jaw clenched. "For years, I allowed myself to be ruled by the fear that your lies might reach my wife." His hand curled at his side. "But no longer." Lucienne swallowed. Thorian's gaze held nothing but truth and fury. "I remember that night," he said quietly. "I remember feeling unwell, seated at the table, a dizziness I could not explain, and then darkness." His eyes burned. "The next I knew, I woke in your bed, a circumstance I never sought, never welcomed, and never repeated." Color drained from Lucienne's face. "You have wielded that single night, engineered by you like a blade against my throat." He took another step. "And now, through your deceit, My wife has been made to believe I willingly sought you, that I betrayed her with intention." His voice broke, raw and low. "That is the deepest cruelty you have ever inflicted." Her lips parted. No words came. "For years, I bore the shame of that night in silence," he continued, voice rough. "Not for fear of society's judgment, but for fear of hers. For fear that she would look at me and see a man unworthy of her." The truth hung between them like thunder. "Your threats end tonight," he said. "I will not be held hostage by your lies, nor will I allow you to wound her further." Lucien's composure trembled. "You think she will believe you over me?" "She will believe the truth." His voice was quiet, deadly certain. "And the truth is this. I rejected you then, I reject you now, and I shall reject every falsehood you attempt to weave around my name." Her eyes narrowed in fury. "This is not finished." "It is," Torian said, turning away. "And you know it." But neither of them knew that miles away in England, the damage had already been done. Elyndra sat in her study, broken, her hands trembling over the venomous letter Lucienne had written. And somewhere across the sea, Torian Evermare realized he was on the verge of losing the only woman he had ever truly loved. Evermare Hall was usually a lively place, children's laughter in the corridors, servants moving with brisk purpose, sunlight catching the polished floors and making them gleam. But the day after Torian left, the house felt strangely hollow, as if someone had opened a window to winter and let the cold seep in. Elyndra remained in her chambers long after dawn had broken. She lay half-propped against the pillows, her body heavy with grief, her eyes swollen from the night's relentless tears. Verena had stayed until nearly midnight, refusing to leave until Elyndra drifted into an exhausted, feverish sleep. Isolde returned before breakfast with a shawl and a basket of lavender biscuits Elyndra never touched. The fire burned low in the grate. The clock ticked steadily, and Elyndra stared at nothing. She felt hollowed out, like a shell left behind by some creature that had fled in the night. Mrs. Hallowmere entered quietly with a basin of warm water and a folded cloth. "Let us freshen you, my lady. It will ease the swelling." Elyndra didn't respond. Her gaze remained fixed on the window. Outside, the winter sky hung thick and unforgiving, the clouds swollen with unfallen snow. Mrs. Hallowmere wrung out the cloth and gently touched it to Elyndra's cheek. Elyndra winced at the contact. Her face was tender from hours of weeping. "My dear," the old woman murmured, unable to hide the trembling sorrow in her voice, "you must let your strength return." Elyndra swallowed hard. "Strength for what, Hallowmere?" "For whatever comes when the master returns." Elyndra shut her eyes. A tear escaped despite her effort to contain it. She whispered, barely audible, "I do not know if I can bear to look at him." Mrs. Hallomere's movement stilled. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of decades of observing the marriages of the wealthy and titled. "Men stray," she said softly. "It is an old sin, older than I am. But a wife's heart feels such suffering more deeply than a man ever could." Elyndra's hand tightened around the bedsheet. "He did not stray out of passion," she whispered. "If he had, I might understand. But to be entangled with a woman who speaks of love and children—" Her voice cracked. "How can I forgive that?" Mrs. Hallowmere placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I do not know, my lady, but you must not face this alone." "Alone?" The word clung to Elyndra like frost. By noon, the household had grown uneasy. The children gathered near the staircase, whispering among themselves. Mira clutched her worn rag doll. Ansel frowned with older brother seriousness, his small brows furrowed. "Is Mama ill?" Mira whispered. "Mrs. Hallowmere said she is resting," Ansel murmured. "But she didn't smile at us this morning. She always smiles." The twins looked at one another with wide, uncertain eyes. Baby Edric fussed in nursemaid Clara's arms, sensing the tension even without words. Ansel's voice lowered. Do you think Papa will come home soon? The question struck Elyndra like an arrow. She stood hidden at the top of the stairs, her hand gripping the banister so tightly her knuckles blanched. She had come to reassure them, but seeing their small, worried faces shattered her resolve. She pressed her forehead to the polished wood and tried to breathe. Her heart ached. Wait for my return. For only your presence stills the breaks. The words played in her mind like a cruel echo, a promise turned into a blade. She did not go to them. She could not. Not yet. Isolde and Verena returned shortly after noon. Verena entered first, cape swirling, eyes blazing with righteous fury. I swear, Elyndra, if I ever lay eyes on that Italian witch— Isolde elbowed her sharply. Not now. Verena glared, but softened her tone. How are you feeling? Are you eating? Drinking? Elyndra managed a faint, brittle shake of her head. Verena sat beside her on the bed and covered Elyndra's hand with her own. Listen to me. You will not waste away over a man's sin. You hear me? He does not deserve your ruin. Elyndra's voice cracked. But I love him. Verena inhaled sharply, her jaw trembling. I know, and that is why this hurts so deeply. Isolde, calmer but equally distraught, pulled a chair closer. Have you thought of what you wish to do? Elyndra's eyes filled again. I cannot leave him. I cannot stay. Either choice feels like drowning. That is because the wound is fresh, Isolde said softly. You must give yourself time. Verena nodded fiercely. And you will stay with me if you choose to go. I will defend you against the entire country if I must. Elyndra looked at her, a broken whisper slipping out. Would society allow it? No, Isolde said gently. But Verena does not care. And neither do I, Verena added dryly. Society can rot. Elyndra almost laughed. Almost. But her breath hitched instead, caught between despair and gratitude. You must understand the risk, Isolde said. If you flee Evermere Hall, Torian may claim full custody. The courts favor men. Elyndra drew a ragged breath. I am trapped. Verena's eyes filled with tears. Then we will hold you until you learn to breathe again. Italy. Far across the sea, Torian Evermere paced the length of his rented chambers with the tension of a man standing on a precipice. The shutters rattled in the evening wind. The lantern cast harsh shadows across the walls. He could not eat. He could not sit. His hands shook slightly as he poured himself a small measure of wine he barely touched. Lucienne's letter had unsettled him. But more than that, her presence upon arrival had ignited a level of dread he had not felt in years. Her threats hovered like a blade above his marriage. You fathered my son. You owe me. I love you. I will take him to your wife. Her voice had followed him even here, into the quiet darkness of the room. He clenched the bridge of his nose. What have I done? He remembered the night he had fallen into her arms, drunk, grieving a financial disaster, desperate to escape the crushing weight of responsibility. It was the regret of his life. He had spent every year since trying to shield Elyndra from that moment. His heart twisted violently at the thought of her face if she ever learned the truth. He didn't know, not yet, that she already had. He didn't know she lay trembling in their bed. He didn't know she now feared him. He didn't know she was deciding whether to flee the very home they built together. He only knew one thing. He could not lose her. Night descended over Evermere Hall. Elyndra sat by the window, wrapped in a shawl Verena had placed around her shoulders. The moon hung pale in the sky, and the air had grown too still, too heavy, too suffocating. Her reflection in the glass looked like a ghost. Eyes swollen, lips parted, breath uneven. Verena, Elyndra whispered. What if he returns as though nothing has happened? Verena stiffened. He will not dare. What if he lies? What if he swears he never touched her? What if I cannot tell truth from deceit? Isolde knelt before her gently. Then look at him. Look into his eyes. A man cannot conceal deep shame, not from the woman he loves. Elyndra's breath stuttered. But what if What if the child is his? The silence that followed was sharp as a blade. Isolde closed her eyes. Verena reached for Elyndra's hand and held it tightly, her fierce eyes shimmering with tears. Then, Verena whispered hoarsely, "You will decide whether love can survive a wound so deep." A tear slid down Elyndra's cheek. She did not wipe it away, because it was no longer sorrow. It was fear. Fear of the truth. Fear of society. Fear of staying. Fear of leaving. Fear of losing her children. Fear of losing herself. And fear of losing the man she still loved. Despite everything. Snow fell quietly over Evermere Hall as Torian Evermere returned home. The horse's hooves thudded softly against the frosted earth, and each step toward the oak door filled him with a heaviness he could not explain. The lamps within glowed faintly, but the warmth he had always associated with home did not greet him. When he stepped inside, the silence struck him first. No children ran to him. No excited voices greeted their father. Even the servants moved as though afraid their footsteps might echo too loudly. Samuel, the butler, bowed. "Good evening, my lord." Torian removed his gloves slowly. "Is something amiss? Where is everyone?" "Her ladyship remains in her chambers." Samuel's voice was too carefully measured. "She has not left them since yesterday." A low unease crept into Torian's bones. He ascended the staircase with deliberate steps, each one heavier than the last. At the top, he paused before her door. He lifted his hand to knock, but something inside him faltered. "Elyndra, may I come in?" For a moment, he heard nothing. Then the faint, soft movement of a latch. She stood in the doorway. Her eyes were swollen, her complexion pale. She held a shawl loosely around her shoulders, and there was such exhaustion in the set of her mouth that Torian's breath caught. "My love, please do not call me that," she whispered. The words pierced him with quiet precision. He stepped inside when she allowed it, and she closed the door behind them. The dim candlelight flickered across her face, revealing grief so deep he felt physically ill. "What has happened?" he asked, voice unsteady. "Tell me, Elyndra. Whatever it is, tell me." She did not speak at first, only reached for something upon a small table. A folded letter. Thorian's stomach turned violently. She extended it toward him, not accusingly, but with a trembling calm that frightened him more than anger ever could. "Explain this." He took it with shaking hands. Recognized the handwriting. Recognized the words he had prayed she would never see. He closed his eyes. "Elyndra, you will not lie to me," she said softly. "Not tonight." He drew a slow breath that trembled despite his effort. "It was one night. Many years ago. I was not myself. I regretted it the moment it occurred, and I have regretted it every day since." "And the child?" Her voice cracked, but she did not raise it. "I do not believe the child is mine," he said, his voice low, desperate. "She has used the claim to trap me, to threaten you, to bind me to her in a way I have despised. I have not touched her since that night. I swear it." Elyndra covered her mouth, tears slipping down between her fingers. "You should have told me." "I could not," he whispered. "My shame, my dread, my fear of losing you was stronger than my courage. I thought I could contain it. I thought I could bury it." "And now?" she asked, tears falling freely. "Now I see the price of my cowardice." His voice shook. "Now I stand before the only person I have ever loved and find myself unworthy of her forgiveness." Her breath broke. She turned away, pressing a hand to the dressing table as though steadying herself. He reached toward her. She flinched. He lowered his arm immediately, agony tightening every line of his face. "Elyndra," he said quietly, "I do not ask for absolution, only the chance to stand near you while you decide what to do with my failures. I cannot bear your presence in this chamber tonight," she whispered. Torian felt his knees weaken. "Permit me the blue room at least. I will not intrude further, but allow me to remain under the same roof." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down. "You may take the blue room. He bowed his head, swallowing a cry that rose in his throat. "Thank you." He walked toward the door with slow, painful steps. At the threshold he stopped, hand trembling against the frame. "Do not think," he said in a hoarse whisper, "that your husband leaves willingly." She couldn't bring herself to answer. He stepped out and closed the door behind him, softly, carefully, as though afraid any louder sound might shatter her completely. The moment he was gone, Elyndra sank to the floor, wrapped her arms around herself, and let the sob she had held back all evening finally tear free. And down the corridor, Torian leaned both hands against the wall and bowed his head, swallowing his own grief in silence. Night settled heavily over Evermere Hall, dimming its corridors and softening the edges of every polished surface. The house was quiet, too quiet, as though every room sensed the unrest that now lived within its walls. Torian walked slowly toward the guest chamber designated for him, his steps unsteady. Each footfall echoed faintly against the wood, mixing with the distant whisper of the winter wind. Only once in their marriage had he slept apart from Elyndra, when she bore their second child. That separation had lasted only a few hours. This one felt colder and endless. He paused outside the blue room, resting his hand against the doorframe, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. He bowed his head, as though in confession to the empty hall. He whispered her name once, not calling for her, but mourning her. Then he entered the room and closed the door softly behind him. Elyndra remained seated where he had left her, upon the small settee near the hearth. Her shawl was wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her hands clasped in her lap in a manner that told of effort to keep her trembling still, effort to maintain dignity despite the pain clawing at her chest. Isolde and Verena were beside her, one seated, one kneeling, each wearing the strained expression of women who wished to carry the weight of a friend's sorrow, but knew they could not. Elyndra stared at the dying embers, her voice barely a breath. "He spoke the truth, and the truth has undone me." Verena reached for her hand. "You owe him nothing, Elyndra." Isolde touched her shoulder gently. "You owe yourself kindness." Elyndra closed her eyes, her breath breaking softly. "He said he feared losing me more than he feared telling me the truth. I do not know whether to consider it love or cowardice." Neither friend answered. Not immediately. In 1887, affairs were spoken of only in whispers, and the heartbreak of wives was endured in silence. But in the sanctuary of Elyndra's chamber, truth was permitted to breathe. Finally, Isolde spoke. A wife's heart can love and ache in the same moment. There is no shame in that. Verena exhaled sharply. Men seldom understand the wounds they inflict. Elyndra's voice shook. "I cannot look upon him without feeling as though the air is too thin to breathe." Verena bowed her head. "Then you must spare yourself his presence." "Yes," Isolde murmured. "For now, distance is mercy." Their words seemed to steady Elyndra slightly, and yet deepen her sorrow. A soft knock sounded at the door. All three women stiffened. Elyndra's breath quickened. "It is him." Isolde exchanged a worried glance with Verena. "Shall we remain?" Elyndra slowly shook her head. "No, I must hear him, but alone." Verena hesitated. "If he causes you pain, I will call for you," Elyndra whispered. The two friends rose with reluctance, smoothing their skirts as though preparing themselves for society once more. Each embraced her briefly. Isolde with quiet tenderness, Verena with fierce protectiveness. Then they stepped aside. "Come in," Elyndra said softly. The door opened. Torian entered with measured steps, as though approaching a wounded creature he feared might flee. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and remorse. The moment he saw Elyndra, something in him broke anew. He bowed his head slightly. "You sent for me." "I believe," she answered quietly, "that we must speak, and no further words should be exchanged in anger." Her restraint wounded him more deeply than any outburst could have. Elyndra His voice faltered as he stepped closer. "I scarcely know how to begin." "You will begin," she said, "with truth. No embellishment. No softened edges." He swallowed. "I shall tell you everything." He remained standing, hands clasped behind his back in a gesture of humility unusual for him. "It was many years ago. I had suffered a loss in business, one that weighed heavily upon me. I drank more than was wise, and in that regrettable state, I weakened." She approached with intent I did not perceive until too late. Elyndra's fingers curled into her shawl. He continued, voice low. "I left her house as though fleeing a fire. At dawn, I swore it would be buried. I believed the shame mine alone." "You believed," Elyndra whispered, "that secrecy was the kinder choice?" He closed his eyes. "No. I believed I did not deserve your forgiveness, and I feared hearing those words fall from your lips. That you wished me gone." Her breath caught as though struck. He opened his eyes again. "I did not father her child, Elyndra. I know this in my heart, but she learned the depth of my shame, and she used it to bind me. Every visit, every excuse I made was out of fear that she would come to you." Elyndra felt the room tilt. A soft tremor overtook her. "You laid deception at the foundation of our marriage," she murmured, tears slowly rising again. "Not with intent to wound, but through fear allowed to fester." "Yes," he whispered. She pressed her hand to her mouth to steady her breath. "And now I scarcely know the man who stands before me." Thorian's shoulders sagged. "I scarcely know myself." Silence fell. A deep, trembling silence filled with the ache of two hearts that still reached for one another, though wounded by circumstance. Elyndra sank onto the settee, unable to remain standing. "I cannot receive you in my chambers tonight," she whispered. "My heart is too raw." Thorian bowed his head with dignity, and devastation mingled. "I understand. If you permit, I shall take the blue room. I shall not trouble you." She nodded once, though her tears renewed. He stepped back toward the door. His hand trembled slightly upon the handle. Before leaving, he spoke in a voice so low she almost did not hear it. "You may turn from me, Elyndra, but I shall not cease loving you. Not even for a moment." A sob escaped her. Quiet, broken, involuntary. Torian flinched as though a blade had slipped between his ribs. He left without another word. Elyndra pressed both hands to her face, her body folding inward as though her strength had been stripped away. Down the corridor, out of sight, Torian Evermere braced one hand against the wall, bowed his head, and swallowed a grief so profound it hollowed him entirely. The morning after their confrontation rose pale and cold, its light an unfriendly visitor creeping across Elyndra's chamber floor. She had not slept. Her eyes were swollen, her pulse unsteady, her breath shallow from the weight of everything she had endured. Verena and Isolde sat with her in quiet vigilance. Neither dared speak at first. They simply remained near, offering their presence as a balm when words were too fragile to bear. Elyndra sat at the edge of her bed, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had blanched. "The world feels altered," she whispered, "as though I have awakened in some unfamiliar place." Isolde lightly touched her shoulder. "Such pain can make a stranger of one's own life." Verena, ever fiercer, leaned forward. "You need not excuse him, Elyndra." His silence was a wound of its own. "I do not excuse him," Elyndra said softly. "But I do not know how to breathe without remembering that he was, the very center of my heart." Isolde's expression softened. A wife's love is not undone in a single night, however deep the blow. Elyndra looked down. A single tear fell onto the folds of her gown. Before Isolde or Verena could offer comfort, the faint sound of hooves reached their ears. The three women stilled. Elyndra's breath trembled. A carriage, approaching Evermere Hall. Verena rose swiftly and stepped near the window. She drew back the curtain just enough to see. "It is him," she murmured. "He has returned." Elyndra felt her heart jolt painfully against her ribs. Isolde moved quickly to her side. "Do you wish us to remain?" But Elyndra already knew the answer. In 1887, no woman, however loyal, could remain in a wife's private space once a husband had returned to mend a fracture. It would be intrusive, improper, even scandalous. Her friends understood this, though love made them slow to admit it. "No," Elyndra breathed. "You must go. He is my husband. Whatever must be said between us alone." Verena hesitated, pain flickering behind her eyes, but propriety demanded she obey. "If he causes you distress, I will send for you," Elyndra said, though her voice barely carried. Isolde placed a hand gently against Elyndra's cheek. "Your strength will not fail you, and if your heart trembles, you know where to find us." Elyndra nodded, unable to speak. Verena and Isolde straightened their gowns, smoothing their gloves, reclaiming the composure expected of Victorian ladies. Though their hearts ached for their friend, they knew they must not intrude upon the sanctity of a marriage, especially one teetering on the precipice of devastation. A firm, slow step was heard in the corridor below. Torian had entered the house. The air in the chamber seemed to vanish. Verena pressed Elyndra's hands one last time. "Courage, my dear. Even the fiercest storm must break." Isolde embraced her briefly, tenderly. "We shall be but a carriage ride away." A soft knock sounded on Elyndra's doorframe. Mrs. Hallowmere, her face pale with strain. "My ladies, Lord Evermere has returned." Verena and Isolde exchanged one last look with Elyndra, then moved toward the door. Their departure was deliberate, silent, graceful, the only acceptable manner for women of their rank to leave such an intimate moment. As they descended the staircase, Torian stood at the foot of it. He looked exhausted, his coat dusted with snow, his hair wind-tossed, his expression carved with remorse he could not conceal. When Verena and Isolde approached, they dipped their heads in the smallest polite gesture, neither warm nor hostile, but correct for the circumstances. They did not utter a word, nor did Torian. He simply inclined his head in return, jaw tight with shame. The great oak door closed behind the two ladies as they stepped into the cold winter air, leaving the burden of the shattered marriage behind them. Elyndra stood alone now within her chamber, her breath trembling as she listened to the faint echo of their carriage departing. The house was silent again. Too silent. A hesitant footstep sounded just beyond the door. Then a pause. A man gathering what little courage remained to him. "Elyndra," Thorian's voice carried through the wood. Low, unsteady. "May I enter?" Her hand faltered on the doorknob. Every instinct urged her to retreat. Every thread of her heart urged her to protect herself. Yet propriety, marital duty, the promise she once gave willingly, held her still. She opened the door. Torian stepped inside. The moment their eyes met, the room shifted. No longer merely four walls, but the battlefield where a marriage's fate would be decided. He removed his gloves, slowly, a gesture strangely reverent, as though he feared even the sound of leather might disturb her fragile composure. "I did not expect you to receive me," he murmured. Elyndra lifted her chin slightly. There is nothing to be gained from silence. He studied her face, her red-rimmed eyes, her trembling hands, the quiet devastation she fought so hard to suppress. And something inside him collapsed. "Elyndra," his voice broke, though he tried to steady it. "I've spent the night searching for the truth. Every truth I should have given you years ago." She turned away, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. A painful silence stretched between them. At last, he spoke again. "I have wronged you in ways that cannot be undone, but I beg you to believe this. Had I known the depth of your grief, I would have chosen ruin over your suffering." A shiver passed through her. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "I know not what to believe," she whispered. "A part of me longs to trust you, and another trembles at the thought." Thorian's breath caught. He stepped forward, then stopped when she stiffened. "I shall not come nearer," he murmured. Not unless you bid me. Her throat tightened. I cannot. He bowed his head, accepting her boundary with a dignity that pained her all the more. I shall not trouble you long, he said. I only wish to say that I will do whatever honor and love require to restore our home, if such a thing is still possible. Her jaw trembled. I do not know. He closed his eyes briefly, as though absorbing a wound. You are the mistress of this house, he said softly. I shall remove myself from your presence until you decide what you can bear. She turned her face away, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. He stepped back toward the door, pausing before leaving. Elyndra, whatever may come, you shall never suffer alone again. He did not wait for her answer. He bowed his head and retreated. When the door closed behind him, Elyndra's strength gave way at last. She sank onto the nearest chair, hands shaking uncontrollably. Outside her window, snow drifted silently over the grounds, and inside the house, two hearts beat in chambers, separated by a single corridor, yet divided by a chasm far wider. For 3 days, Evermere Hall moved with the stillness of a house mourning something unseen. Elyndra rose before dawn each morning, though she scarcely slept. She wrapped herself in her shawl, pinned her hair with trembling fingers, and forced her breath into some semblance of steadiness before descending to the nursery at first light. Her children greeted her with the same bright affection they always had, but she felt as though she were watching them through glass. Present, yet distant, loving, yet profoundly tired. They did not know. They must not know. She could not allow their world to fracture before she understood whether hers could be repaired. Downstairs, the servants whispered only when doors were closed. Even Mrs. Hallowmere walked more softly than usual, as though any sudden sound might shatter the fragile peace. And Torian moved like a man who feared breaking the air between them. He rose early, long before the household stirred, and spent his hours in the library or on the estate grounds. He returned only when he knew she would be elsewhere, not out of avoidance, out of reverence for her pain. On the morning of the 3rd day, Elyndra descended the main staircase with slow steps, her fingers grazing the polished banister for balance. She had not expected to see him, but he was there. Standing at the base of the staircase, speaking quietly with Samuel, his posture straight though exhaustion pulled faint shadows beneath his eyes. His gaze lifted at the sound of her step. Their eyes met. The moment was so brief, a mere breath, and yet it struck her with startling force. His expression softened instantly, as though the sight of her had unraveled something tight within him. He bowed his head slightly. "Good morning," he said, voice low but steady. She halted on the last step. Her heart trembled with conflicting instinct. To turn away, to run, to stay. "Good morning," she answered, her tone polite but distant, the words carefully measured so as not to betray the ache beneath them. A silence followed, heavy and brittle. He seemed to search for something more to say, some phrase that would neither intrude upon her boundaries nor diminish the sincerity of his remorse. But nothing came. So he stepped aside, granting her the full space of the hall. She walked past him slowly, her breath shallow, the faint scent of his cologne stirring memories she wished she could silence. She felt his gaze follow her, though he dared not speak again. Only when she turned the corner did he exhale, shoulders sinking with a quiet grief. Later that afternoon, Elyndra retreated to the conservatory, the one place in the house where she could breathe freely. The pale winter sunlight filtered through the glass, casting a soft glow over the potted ferns and wilting orchids. She pressed her fingertips to one of the leaves. Her touch trembled. A rustle sounded behind her. She turned. Torian stood in the doorway, coat draped over one arm, his other hand braced lightly against the doorframe as though he had hesitated before entering. "Forgive me," he said softly. "I did not know you were here. I will leave." "No." The word escaped him before he could restrain it. He lowered his voice immediately. "Please, remain. I shall go." His restraint, his deference, his reverence. It all fractured her in quiet, unexpected ways. "You may stay," she whispered, though she did not meet his eyes. He stepped inside slowly, maintaining a respectful distance. The small sounds of the glass house, the creak of settling panes, the distant call of birds, filled the fragile silence. After a long moment, he spoke. Not to plead, not to justify, but simply, gently. "Your garden suffers in winter," he murmured, looking toward the frost-kissed blossoms. "But it always blooms again come spring." Elyndra's lips parted slightly. A simple remark, yet she heard the deeper truth beneath it. Wounds do not last forever, even when they feel eternal. She found her breath catching unexpectedly. "You tended this conservatory yourself," he continued softly. "Every blossom here flourished under your care. You have always possessed a quiet strength, Elyndra, even when you believe yourself broken." The praise did not warm her. It hurt. It reminded her that he had once spoken such words before. Words she believed without hesitation. She forced her gaze onto the tiled floor. "Please do not speak kindly to me. Not yet. It confuses the heart." Torian bowed his head. "As you wish." He stepped back toward the doorway, intending to leave her in peace. But as he reached the threshold, she turned slightly, just enough for him to see the faint tremor in her voice. "Torian." He stopped instantly. "Yes?" She swallowed. "I cannot promise forgiveness. I do not expect it. I cannot promise trust. I will earn it, if you allow me." Her breath wavered. "I do not know if I can bear the attempt." He closed his eyes, emotion tightening the line of his mouth. "Then I shall walk beside your sorrow, not ahead of it. Whatever pace your heart demands, mine will follow." Her chest tightened painfully. He bowed and left her alone. The conservatory door closed with a soft click, leaving only the plants, the winter light, and the echo of a promise she did not yet believe, but could not bring herself to refuse. A thin winter sun shone weakly over the estate, its pale light doing little to warm the frost that clung to the earth. Evermere Hall remained tense, its walls seeming to listen to every footstep, every silence, every restrained breath between its lord and lady. Torian had risen before dawn again. He had scarcely slept. Exhaustion hung beneath his eyes like shadows that refused to lift. He wrote letters through the early hours, dozens of them, to Italy, to old acquaintances, to those who might know the truth he had begun to suspect, but dared not speak without proof. He sealed each envelope with trembling hands. "Someone must have known," he murmured to himself. "Someone must have seen what I refused to see." He could not allow Elyndra to live with a lie that had already stolen so much from her heart. Not anymore. Elyndra spent the morning in the nursery, sitting beside her daughter's cradle and watching her breath rise and fall in soft, steady patterns. The children's innocent laughter drifted through the rooms, warming corners of the house untouched by sorrow. If she closed her eyes, she could almost pretend the world had not changed. But it had, and her heart knew it. When she left the nursery, her steps carried her down the long corridor overlooking the gardens. The frost sparkled faintly on the glass, white and cold, so very much like the ache settling beneath her ribs. As she turned a corner, she nearly collided with Torian. He stopped abruptly, breath catching in his throat. Elyndra froze, fingers tightening around the folds of her gown. She had not meant to cross his path. She was not ready to endure the tenderness in his eyes, or the regret. But he bowed slightly, stepping aside. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I did not hear you approach." She swallowed, her pulse unsteady. "There is no offense." He hesitated, just a heartbeat, nothing more, before adding, "I have sent for information from Italy. Matters regarding the truth." Her breath stilled. He continued softly, "When it arrives, you shall hear it first. I vow that nothing shall be hidden from you again." Her gaze flickered toward him despite herself, and something in his expression, raw, unguarded, weary, pierced straight through the fragile defenses she fought to maintain. But she could not respond. She simply dipped her head and walked past him. He watched her go, the ache in his chest tightening with every step she took away from him. The letter arrived 2 days later. It was delivered by a young courier who asked for Torian by name and refused to entrust the sealed envelope to anyone else, not even Samuel. The moment Torian saw the foreign postmark, his breath emptied from his lungs. He dismissed the courier with trembling hands. He broke the seal. He read. And as his eyes moved down the page, the color left his face entirely. The words were simple, but they struck with the force of a blow. The boy you inquire after is not of your blood, my lord. His mother was known for her deceptions, even in her youth. I served in her household until last summer, and I speak only truth when I say she boasted often of her hold over men, and of the lie she kept from you. The true father departed long before the child was born. There was more. Dates, names, small proofs, but Torian scarcely saw the ink as he lowered the letter with a trembling hand. The truth. It was the truth. He sank into the nearest chair, his breath uneven, his hands covering his eyes. For years he had carried the weight of that child, the shame, the fear, the blackmail. He had allowed Lucienne to wield it like a weapon against him and against the woman he loved. Now the chain had snapped, but the victory tasted of ashes. Because Elyndra did not know, and she did not trust him enough to believe it without proof. His heart twisted painfully. He rose and left the library, letter in hand, his steps carrying him down the corridor toward Elyndra's sitting room. He paused at her door, breath shaking. Inside, he heard the faint rustle of fabric. Her moving about the room, unaware of the letter that might change everything. He raised his hand to knock, but his fingers stopped short of the door. What if the truth came too late? What if she had already begun to let her heart slip away from him entirely? What if this letter, this fragile piece of salvation, could not mend what his silence had already fractured? He lowered his hand. He needed to be certain before he placed the truth in her hands. He needed to approach her gently, carefully, like a man offering his heart while knowing it might be struck from his grasp. He stepped back from the door, but as he turned, he froze. Elyndra stood at the end of the corridor, her shawl in her hands, watching him with a quiet, unreadable expression. He did not know how long she had been standing there. Her eyes drifted to the letter in his trembling hand, then returned to his face. A silence unfurled between them, taut and fragile. At last she spoke, her voice soft, almost unsteady. "Is that from Italy?" Torian swallowed. "Yes." Another silence. A breath, a heartbeat. "Does it concern her?" Elyndra asked quietly. "And the child?" Torian's fingers tightened around the letter. "It does." Elyndra exhaled shakily, as though bracing herself for another wound. He stepped forward, slowly, carefully, holding out the envelope with reverence, as though offering his very soul. "It contains the truth," he whispered. "Not my truth, not hers. The truth as witnessed by another." Elyndra's gaze fell to the letter, then lifted to his eyes. He had never looked at her with such complete surrender. Her breath trembled. "May I read it?" she whispered. His answer was immediate, fervent. "You may read anything that belongs to me." He placed the letter in her hands. Their fingertips brushed. Both flinched. Not from pain, but from the echo of something still alive beneath the sorrow. Elyndra looked down at the envelope, her heart pounding. And Torian watched her as a man watches the turning of fate, with fear, with hope, and with the knowledge that the next breath might decide the rest of his life. Elyndra stood in the corridor long after Torian stepped back. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Her fingers trembled around its edges, the seal already broken, the contents waiting like a held breath. She did not read it there. She retreated to her sitting room, the quietest place she knew. lit only by a single oil lamp whose flame quivered as though sensing the storm she carried in her chest. She sat, and for a long moment, she simply stared at the letter. Only when her heartbeat steadied enough not to blur her vision did she open it fully. Her breath trembled as her eyes moved across the page. The first line shattered the room around her. "The boy you inquire after is not of your blood, my lady." She pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from crying out. Her eyes raced ahead, devouring every word. His mother, known for deceit, boasted often of the lie she carried. The true father departed long before. The truth unfurled mercilessly. A truth that rewrote everything. A truth that made her vision swim. Her husband, her Torian, had not fathered the child. He had not betrayed her beyond that single night of weakness. He had not continued an affair. He had not lived a double life. He had lived instead under a burden of shame, one he had carried alone, choosing to hide it not out of disregard for her, but out of fear. Fear of losing her, fear of destroying their home, fear of becoming unworthy of the one woman whose love he cherished. Her breath shook as she lowered the letter, her hand covering her mouth to stifle the sob rising from her chest. She leaned forward, elbows braced on her knees, the letter resting loosely in her lap. Tears gathered, slow at first, then spilling freely down her cheeks. All those years, all those distant looks, all those hushed conversations he took behind closed doors, not secrets of passion, secrets of torment. He had suffered, and she had not seen it. A soft knock broke the silence. She inhaled sharply, hastily wiping her cheeks though her tears kept falling. "Elyndra?" Thorian's voice was low, muffled by the door. May I speak with you?" Her breath caught. She could not answer. Not yet. Not while her heart quivered like a torn thing struggling to heal. The knock did not come again. He respected her silence. But she heard him linger there, his breath unsteady, his presence a shadow on the other side of the door. She rose slowly, letter in hand, and walked to the threshold. She hesitated only a moment before pulling it open. Torian straightened immediately, as though he had been leaning on the door for strength. He took one look at her tear-stained cheeks and inhaled sharply, his eyes burning with remorse. "You read it," he murmured. She could not speak. His throat worked as though swallowing pain. "Elyndra, I never sought forgiveness, only that you know the truth of my heart." Her fingers tightened around the letter. "Why did you not tell me sooner?" Her voice broke on the last word. "Because I feared losing you more than I feared the lie," he whispered. A single tear slipped down his cheek. He bowed his head, not dramatically, but with the quiet humility of a man who had been rebuilt from the inside by remorse. "I have lived in dread every day since," he said softly. "Not of scandal, not of judgment, but of you turning from me. You were always the part of my life I could not bear to lose." Her hand trembled. "Torian, do you understand how deeply you wounded me?" "Yes," he whispered, "and I shall spend every remaining day of my life mending what my silence broke, if you permit me even a single chance." His voice cracked then, barely perceptible. Elyndra looked at him, truly looked. Not at the man who sinned, not at the man who hid, but at the man who loved her so fiercely he'd rather suffer alone than watch pain shadow her face. This was not the man she imagined. This was not the story her heartbreak had woven. This was something achingly different, something real. Her fingers loosened, the letter slipping slightly in her grasp. "I do not know yet what forgiveness looks like," she whispered. "But the truth has changed something inside me." He lifted his gaze to hers. Hope flickered, tentative, aching, fragile. Her breath wavered. "I no longer see you as a stranger." A shuddered exhale escaped him, half relief, half agony. Elyndra stepped back then, unable to bear the closeness of their emotions. "Good night, Torian," she whispered. He bowed slightly, reverent, wounded, full of a devotion too deep for words. "Good night, my heart," he murmured before he could stop himself. She closed the door gently, her hand lingering on the wood. Inside her room, she pressed the letter to her chest. Outside, he rested his forehead softly against the door, breathing shakily, as though her words had given him a fraction of life he thought lost forever. The next morning arrived in a hush of pale winter light, the kind that softened the sharp edges of the world. Frost clung to the window panes in delicate lacework, shimmering faintly as Elyndra drew back the curtains. She had scarcely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the words of the letter, and beside them, his face. Not the face of the man she confronted in fury, but the face she found outside her door last night, worn, humbled, trembling with a kind of devotion she had not known how to name. She pressed a hand to her heart, as though trying to still what stirred there. She did not forgive him. Not yet. But neither could she summon the same rage that once held her upright. Something had shifted. Downstairs, Torian stood in the breakfast room, untouched tea cooling beside him. He had not eaten. He had scarcely moved. His hands were clasped behind his back, shoulders tense, gaze fixed out the tall windows overlooking the gardens. He turned the moment he heard her footsteps. Elyndra paused in the doorway. He inclined his head. Nothing more. But the simplicity of the gesture, the reverence in it, made something inside her chest pull taut. "Good morning," he said quietly, as though afraid to disturb the air between them. "Good morning," she replied, her voice softer than intended. A silence stretched. Not hostile, not cold, but delicate, as though both were afraid to breathe too deeply. He reached for the teapot. "May I pour yours?" She hesitated. There had been days, years, when this simple courtesy was part of their ordinary life. When he rose early to pour her tea, knowing precisely how she liked it. When their mornings began with quiet intimacy, not distance. She nodded. His exhale was subtle but unmistakably relieved. He poured with steady hands, though she saw the faint tremor he tried to hide. When he offered the cup, their fingers brushed. Both froze. Neither drew back immediately. It was only a second. But for a second, it felt like something half-remembered and deeply missed. She accepted the cup and sat. He remained standing as though unsure whether he was permitted to join her. "You may sit," she said gently, "if you wish." The change in his face was barely perceptible, but it was there. A quiet gratitude. A man starved for the smallest scrap of her warmth. He sat slowly, hands clasped before him on the table. Another silence settled between them, but this time it was not sharp or heavy. More like a pause between heartbeats. Elyndra lifted her tea. He watched her, just a glance, quickly averted. But she saw it. The longing, the ache, the fear that one wrong word would shatter this fragile moment. And unexpectedly, she spoke first. "The truth? Last night." She swallowed. "It was not what I expected." He tensed, waiting for a blow. "It changed things," she continued softly. "Not everything, but something." He bowed his head slightly. "That is more than I deserve." She looked at him, then really looked. His eyes were shadowed. His jaw had lost its firmness. He seemed smaller somehow, not in stature, but in certainty. "Torian," she whispered, "you carried this alone for so long." His breath caught. She had not spoken his name in days. His eyes lifted to hers, and the raw yearning there nearly undid her. "I carried it," he said quietly, "because I thought it better that I suffer than you." A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. He flinched, not from anger, but from the sight of her pain. "Do not cry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, I do not know how to exist when you cry." Elyndra drew a slow breath, steadying herself. "I am not crying from anger," she said softly. "Only from everything, the years, the silence, The weight you hid. The weight I felt without understanding. Torian closed his eyes as though her words were both balm and blade. I never meant for you to bear any of it, he murmured. But I did, she whispered. And so did you. Their gazes held, longer than before. Long enough that something warm flickered in the cold space between them. No forgiveness, not yet, but recognition, understanding, a crack in the ice. She rose then, slowly. He stood instantly, as he always had. Instinctive courtesy, instinctive devotion. I shall be in the conservatory, she said. He nodded, though his voice shook when he replied, If you have need of anything. She hesitated at the doorway. Do I? The thought surprised her, but she simply nodded once and left. When she was gone, Torian placed a hand over his eyes, his shoulders trembling with silent relief. She had spoken his name. She had allowed him to sit. She had accepted tea. She had looked at him without hatred. Small things, perhaps, but to a man dying of remorse, they were everything. Evening fell gently over Evermere Hall, casting long shadows that stretched across the corridors like memories. Elyndra moved through the quiet rooms with slow, thoughtful steps, her fingers grazing the banister as though grounding herself in every passing moment. All afternoon she had wandered, not to escape him, but to steady her heart. For years she had lived beside this man with trust so complete it felt like breath. For days she had lived beside him with a wound so deep it felt like death. And now, for the first time since she opened that terrible first letter, she felt something loosening inside her. Something tender, something frightening, something like hope. She paused at the conservatory door, drawn by the faint glow within. Torian stood alone among the vines and wintering flowers, the soft lamplight turning his figure into a silhouette of thought and sorrow. His coat lay discarded on a chair, as though even fabric felt too heavy for a heart already burdened. He held a small object in his hands, something he turned slowly, reverently. Elyndra stepped closer. It was her old hairpin, gold filigree, a tiny pearl at its center, the one she'd worn on their wedding night. Her breath caught. He had kept it for 10 years. His thumb traced the pearl as though memorizing its shape. His shoulders rose and fell in a slow, uncertain breath, one that trembled on the exhale. Torian, she whispered. He turned sharply, and everything on his face, fear, longing, exhaustion, devotion, flashed bare before he could hide it. He bowed his head immediately, almost instinctively. As you wish, my lady. She flinched at the formality. Please, do not call me that. Her voice cracked slightly. Not tonight. His breath faltered. He lifted his gaze, cautious, disbelieving. She stepped closer, her hands clasped before her to keep them steady. I saw what you held. He closed his fist around it as though protecting something fragile. It is nothing. Only a keepsake. It is not nothing, she said gently. Silence stretched. Quiet. Aching. Finally, she whispered, Torian, why did you keep it? He opened his hand slowly. The pin gleamed faintly in the lamplight. His voice, when it came, was barely more than breath. Because it was the first thing you ever dropped in my presence, the first moment I realized you made the air around me shift. I meant to return it to you, but I feared you might think it foolish. And then, somehow, keeping it felt like keeping a piece of the night you became mine. Her lips parted in a quiet gasp. No man had ever said anything more devastatingly tender without meaning to. He bowed his head again, shame returning. I had no right to hold on to it after what I did. Elyndra swallowed, her voice trembling. You loved me even then. He closed his eyes. From the moment I saw you. A tear escaped down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly, but not quickly enough. Torian inhaled sharply. Elyndra, please. He took a single step forward, then stopped as though fearing his presence might wound her. She looked at him. really looked at the man she married, at the man who had broken, at the man who had been punished by his own heart for a decade, and she whispered the question her soul had carried for days. "Do you still love me?" His face crumpled. He dropped to his knees before he even realized he had moved, and the sound he made, a soft, broken exhale, might have shattered the hardest of hearts. "Elyndra," he whispered, his voice raw, "I do not know how to live without you. I do not know how to breathe without knowing your heart is within reach of mine. I have loved you every day of our marriage, even when I was unworthy of you, even when I feared you would see the worst of me." He bowed his head until his forehead touched her hand. He did not dare hold it. He simply rested there, as though her skin alone could absolve or condemn him. "I love you," he said again, brokenly. "More than I ever deserved to." Elyndra's breath trembled violently. A sob rose, quiet but full, and she brought her free hand to cover her mouth. For 10 long years, she had never seen him brought to his knees. Not in battle, not in grief, not in joy, only now, only for her. She lowered herself slowly, her skirts pooling around them, and lifted her hand to his cheek. He flinched, out of reverence, not fear. Her thumb brushed his skin, and in that single touch, something inside him collapsed. She whispered, "Torian, look at me." He raised his head as though it cost him everything. Tears threatened his eyes, barely held at bay. "I have been so lost without you," she whispered. "So hurt. But I see you now. I see the man behind all of this. The man who carried his shame alone because he loved me more fiercely than he knew how to confess." His breath shook. "And her voice broke. "I never stopped loving you either." A soft, wounded sound escaped him, half relief, half disbelief. He reached for her hand, but stopped himself inches away. "May I?" he whispered. Her heart splintered. "Yes." When his fingers closed around hers, it felt like the first breath after nearly drowning. They stayed there on the floor of the conservatory. A duke and his wife, 2 hearts trembling in the half-light, surrounded by wintering roses. And for the first time, the ache between them softened into something fragile and new. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something that looked very much like the beginning of it. Winter loosened its grip on Evermere Hall in the days that followed, though snow still brushed the gardens and the air carried its familiar bite. Inside, however, something warmer began to stir. Not quickly, not loudly, but like frost softening under the first shy touch of sunlight. Elyndra and Torian moved through the halls with a new quiet between them. Not the painful silence of estrangement, but the gentle hush of 2 hearts learning how to reach again. He did not ask for forgiveness. She did not offer it. Yet every day, something shifted. A glance held a heartbeat longer, a word softened, a breath steadying. It was their eldest daughter who noticed first. "Mama," Leora whispered one evening as Elyndra brushed her hair. "Papa smiles again, only a little. But it is there." The brush stilled in Elyndra's hand. "And you smile too," the girl added, "as though something in your heart is waking up." The truth of it trembled inside her. Later that night, she found herself standing outside the library door, listening to the faint scratch of Torian's pen. He wrote late into the night. Letters to sever the remnants of Lucienne's deceit. Letters to restore the honor that had been stolen by a lie. Her hand hovered at the doorknob. Not to confront him. Simply because she wished to be near him. She didn't open it. Not yet. But she remained there. Long enough for him to sense her presence. He paused in his writing and turned slightly toward the door. He didn't call out, didn't speak, but he smiled, soft and small, and something inside her shifted again. 3 nights later, she found him in the drawing room, firelight warming the room with a gentle, crackling glow. He was sorting letters, shoulders tense with quiet effort. The flames softened the heavy lines carved into his face by regret. "Torian," she said softly, He stood at once, almost too quickly. "Yes? There is tea," she murmured. "If you would, join me." He looked almost undone by the invitation. "I would be honored." They sat near the fire, each holding a cup. The warmth from the hearth brushed their faces, gentle and golden. Elyndra watched him in the shifting light, her husband, worn and remorseful, yes, but also the man who had once held her heart with both strength and tenderness. "I read the letter again today," she said quietly. Torian stiffened, but he did not look away. "And I thought," she continued, voice trembling, "how different these years might have been had you not borne its weight alone." His jaw tightened with shame. "I feared you would think me weak," he whispered, "for being ensnared even once." "Everyone falters," she said. "Not everyone repents." His eyes widened, stunned. "You have repented every day since, Torian." He covered his mouth briefly, steadying a tremor. "I never wanted you to carry any of it," he murmured. "But I did," she whispered. "And so did you." The way he looked at her then, it was as though the entire world rested in her hands. She reached out, not boldly, but with tentative grace, and her fingers brushed his. He inhaled sharply. "Elyndra," her name cracked in his throat. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I'm trying to find my way back to you." His breath broke. "You're all I've ever wanted, and I've never stopped wanting you." Tears gathered in her eyes. She blinked once, and they fell. Soft, warm, healing. He reached for her hand fully this time. She let him take it. The room fell away. Only the fire remained. Only their breaths. Only the fragile, aching closeness of two souls rediscovering each other. She moved closer, her shoulder brushing his. He froze, almost afraid to believe it. Elyndra lifted her face, studying him, really studying him. The pain, the devotion, the years they had shared, the love that had never ceased even when wounded. Her voice was barely a breath. "Torian, may I?" His eyes softened with something like reverence. "You may ask anything of me." Her hand slipped to his cheek delicately, the way one touches something precious. He closed his eyes, overcome. "Look at me," she whispered. He did. And for the first time since their world had broken, she leaned in and pressed her lips to his. Softly, tremulously, with all the tenderness of a heart choosing to hope again. He drew in a shuddering breath, his hand rising to cradle the back of her head as though afraid she might fade from his grasp. He kissed her back carefully, not claiming, not demanding, but with the reverence of a man who had been given a second chance at breathing. When she pulled back, her forehead rested against his. "It will take time," she murmured. "I will wait an eternity," he whispered. She smiled through her tears, a small, trembling, beautiful smile. And in the quiet glow of the dying fire, wrapped in each other's arms, Elyndra and Torian found what had been lost. Not the past, not perfection, but the beginning of their home again. Thank you, dear friends, for spending this time with us. Stories like these remind us that even the quietest hearts can find extraordinary love, and that life's most tender triumphs often begin in the moments we feel most unseen. If tonight's journey touched you, we invite you to stay just a little longer. There's a special bonus song waiting at the end, created to keep you in the same soft, romantic world. Thank you for being part of our community. Your support, your presence, and your kindness.
I never meant to carve you with the sharpness of my fear, but every wound I left inside you still echoes in my ear. If love demands a sacrifice, then take all that I am. I'd give my life to shield your heart, I'd break for you again. You think I wish to hurt you, love. You think I meant you pain. The truth is every tear you shed, I felt it like my own blood stain. Those nights apart were punishment, but I was punishing myself the same. I cannot imagine my life without you. Not one sunrise, not one fall. Take every sorrow onto my shoulders. Just don't let our story end at all. If love must ache to keep us standing, then let the ache be mine to bear. For a life without you isn't living. A life without you isn't life anywhere. You're the mother of our children, and I cried the day they came. The moment that I held our son, I swore I'd never be the same. I'd give my breath before your tears could ever fall again. It hurts to think you leave me. It hurts to think you might. But darling, if you walked away, my world would lose its light. I loved you even when I broke. I loved you through the night. If you need to hurt me, I'll take the blow, I'll take the scar. For losing you would cost me more than anything I've ever lost so far. I'd cross 1,000 winter fields just to know where you are. I never meant to freeze you out, but sorrow taught me walls. I built them out of trembling hands and waited for them to fall. But every night without your breath was colder than them all. I cannot imagine my life without you. Not one sunrise, not one fall. Take every sorrow onto my shoulders. Just don't let our story end at all. If love must ache to keep us standing, then let the ache be mine to bear. For a life without you isn't living. A life without you isn't life anywhere. Your pain inside my chest, if it would give you peace. Let me be the weight that breaks, so your wounds can finally cease. Just promise that you'll stay, my love, and never let this story cease. The nights were long without you, and I prayed you felt me near. I whispered all my broken truths into the dark for you to hear. Forgive the ways I pushed you from me. I was drowning in my fear. When you turned from me in silence, my world fell torn apart. I'd rather bleed 1,000 wounds than lose the beating of your heart. I've loved you since the first soft breath that bound our souls to start. If loving you is fragile, then let us break and mend again. For every tear you shed alone, I swear I felt the same. Your pain was always mine to carry. Your love, my sweetest flame. If all that's left is pleading, then here I am on bended soul. If all that's left is truth, my love, then know you make me whole. Let the winter winds forgive us. Let our shattered pieces fold. I cannot imagine my life without you. Not one sunrise, not one fall. Take every sorrow onto my shoulders. Just don't let our story end at all. If love must take to keep us standing, then let the ache be mine to bear. For a life without you isn't living. A life without you isn't life anywhere. If all that's left is bleeding, then here I am on bended soul. If all that's left is truth, my love, then know you make me whole. Let the winter winds forgive us. Let our shattered pieces fold. I cannot imagine my life without you. Not one sunrise, not one fall. Take every sorrow onto my shoulders. Just don't let our story end at all. If love must stay to keep us standing, then let the ache be mine to bear. For a life without you isn't living. A life without you isn't life anywhere. Stay with me, love. Stay and let the healing start. For without you, there is no living.